Okay.
Hi, Stephen Walker here with my friend, Coach Dave Brown, my cousin, my family, my muse. Um, we had an interesting day yesterday where we were watching Wimbledon matches and we started talking about all kinds of aspects of performance in tennis as a combat sport. And one of those things was the podium performance, which the criteria we've already talked about in previous videos in the Academy. But Dave has an interesting approach to that. First off, let me introduce Dave Brown. Dave is an elite masters professional in the United States Professional Tennis Association and has been a USTA District Division president in the Intermountain in the South and Central Florida regions. He's coached D1 tennis at Colorado State University and served as a director of tennis for several prominent clubs, including the Harvest House in Boulder, Colorado, and at the Florida Tennis Center in Daytona Beach and Plantation Bay in Ormond Beach, Florida. As a competitor, Dave played at number one on the St. Mary's College tennis team in Moraga, California, and held a USPTA state, sectional, and national ranking in singles and doubles in the USTA national and father-son competitions, open division with his son Aaron Brown. He's won the Intermountain Division Pro of the Year. He's been the USPTA Florida District Pro of the Year for 6 years or 7 years. Anyway, he's a hot shot, a mucky muck in tennis, both in the national and in the regional levels. And it's my pleasure to be able to talk to you about the stuff that we're going to be talking about in tennis right now.
Well, it's great to be here.
So you mentioned to me yesterday the 5 Ps. What are the 5 Ps? Talk to me about them and why are they important?
The 5 Ps are proper preparation prevents poor performance. And it's just a nice little acronym that I use to remind me of what needs to be done before you really compete. And it's very detailed in our sport of tennis. You know, there's a lot that goes into preparing for a tennis match. It's not just show up and play. So it can start with basically physically. You know, you really have to be physically prepared, whatever that might be. Mostly, I look at tennis as being a game that's played below your waist. So you've got to be able to move, and your legs become a very, very important part, of the game. Because if you can't get to the ball, then you can't hit it very well. So you have to, physically get yourself set, and then if you're physically ready, then mentally you'll be much stronger, and that's where it starts. And so you physically prepare, you plan your practices, you try to simulate game conditions in your practices, and always put in your best effort like you were in a real match. And that's the beginnings.
One of the things that we talked about yesterday was at the level that these guys are playing at Wimbledon right now. It is so physically taxing. The number of injuries, we just talked about 4 or 5 of them yesterday of some of the top players in the world. How does an athlete like that come back from an injury? What do they have to do in order to train to be at the place where they can perform again?
Well, a lot of it may have to do with their age. The younger guys can come back a little faster than the older guys, and Federer, Nadal, these are good examples of guys that take a little longer than Djokovic. So, it's time. You have to have the time, the patience, the guidance, the team. You notice these guys always have good people around them to to set them right, to keep them in the right frame of mind, because I'm sure it's very frustrating. I can't tell you how many injuries I've had to withstand just in my own sphere, so that I can continue to compete. So it's something you constantly have to be aware of. You constantly have to take care of yourself, and it's not an easy task.
What kind of an entourage will these players have? So, Djokovic is coming back from an injury. He played well enough yesterday. But, what will be comprised of his team?
Well, you always talking about when they thank their team, and they always mention the trainer, the physio. And that goes back to the physical part, because the game has just gotten so physically demanding. And some of them, they have spouses. I don't think the spouses get enough credit for what they do to keep their player motivated, do the right things to keep them happy in the career they've chosen. And then, some of them they'll have coaches. They'll have actual coaches that look at the technical side of what their game is doing, because even a guy like Federer is always looking to improve their game. So they're always working on new things and bettering their game, strengthening their strengths and strengthening their weaknesses, making them stronger and better.
Chris Carmichael, who was Lance Armstrong's coach, used to always talk about, train your weakness, train your weakness, train your weakness, race your strengths. How does that apply to tennis?
Oh, it's right on. It's exactly the same thing. In tennis, if you play to win, you always play your strengths to the opponent's weaknesses. So that's how you win. So it's exactly what you said in tennis. It's the same. You got to identify those weaknesses, and that's how you're gonna be successful out there.
When we talked about what's it mean as a coach of tennis players, we talked a little bit about some of the things that you do with these athletes when you're trying to prepare them for competition. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, you work with them, and you try to make sure that they have all the right things. Are they eating properly? Are they taking care of themselves? Are they getting enough rest? They still have to have a social life. They have to be enjoying their life outside of tennis. Be normal. Don't. Sometimes we have such a single track, and then that can be detrimental to an athlete. So you want somebody who's well-rounded, enjoying life. If they're enjoying life, then they're going to enjoy their sport, and so try to keep it as normal as possible.
When it gets into the particulars of how you might prepare them for matches that they're going to play, so for example, in collegiate tennis, you've got a number of singles matches, you've got a number of doubles matches. Even in high school, it's that way. What do you do to get them ready to play?
Well, I always try to say, let's go out and play your game. Play, be yourself. Do the things that you do well, and hopefully that's going to be enough to win the match. So that's it. You can't be, unless you really know specifically who you're going to compete. Sometimes you have no idea. So it's just going out there, being confident in your own skin, in your own game, in what you do well, and being prepared to make the very best effort to do those things well.
Do you have a systematic way of going about in training your athletes in shot making? I mean, every guy that I've ever known that plays tennis loves to get that big hitter on the opposite side, where they can just go back and forth and really hit it hard and, let it rip. But that's not what happens in competition. How do you prepare people for that?
Well, what you described is a person who's always getting the ball in their ideal strike zone, you know, and that's not the game. Now, I'm preparing to play an event next week on grass. There, you know, so, well, how do you prepare for that? Well, you know, every bounce on grass is you just don't know. So it's pretty hard to, you know, to pick the exact circumstances you're going to be at. So you just have to always try to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. Practice with balls out of your strike zone. Practice in adverse conditions where you really don't know, and see how you react. And that's probably the best way to prepare for things when you don't know what's coming.
Okay. All right. Very good point. Now, you've also been a parent, because when you're playing in this open division in the USTA father-son tournament on grass in Boston, week and a half from now?
Yeah.
When you do that, you're going to be playing with your partner, Aaron, who happens to be your son. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about parenting an athlete that's coming up and playing at a competitive, highly competitive level. But first, let's just address, what are you going to do to be getting specifically ready for that?
Well, for us, you know, unfortunately, we can't practice on grass. So, you know, I have to practice. I'm normally playing on clay here in Florida, so I'm practicing more on hard courts for a faster bounce. He has more access where he is, because he's closer to the venue where we're going to be playing, and he has access to artificial grass courts to play on, so he'll practice on those. But as far as playing together, we won't really know until a few days before the event when we get together, and then we start, you know, planning what we're going to be doing for the matches coming, because we'll have seen the draw, we'll know who we're going to be playing. Some, you know, for playing as seeded players, well, you know, that's going to be our tough luck. We'll really have to play well to compete in any case, but we won't know that until we actually get on the courts together.
How do you personally prepare, because you're going to be going up against kids in their 20s,
Yeah.
you know, active college players right now, and you've got, well, let's just say a few years on them.
Yeah.
How do you specifically get ready for that?
Well, one of the young fellows who works with me is one of those hard hitters that I'm going to be practicing, and we actually go out and I play with him to get used to the type of ball that he hits. It's much harder. It's coming at me, you know, much faster with a lot more spin than, you know, I normally get, and that will get me, you know, as ready as I possibly can.
What do you do for your footwork? Because that's hugely important on grass.
Well, you know, the footwork, it's actually playing points, you know, assimilating, you know, what we're going to be doing. For example, you're going to be coming to the net a lot more often on grass, so a lot of the movement forward, getting to the net, so you can simulate game situations where in one case we play one bounce. So that means you're only allowed one bounce of the ball during the point, which means you have no choice but to move in. And that motivates you, instead of staying back and just rallying. No, you've got to move and move forward. And with those repetitions, that's good preparation.
And when the ball's coming as fast as it is, do you have any drills that you use to train your vision to really see the ball?
Well, one of the things that I always remind, if I'm expecting to receive a really difficult serve, for example, which I will, there's two things that I'm constantly reminding myself as I'm getting ready, and that's watch the ball, okay, move your feet. And if you do those two things, hopefully some good things will happen.
I mean, Galway used to have this game, bounce hit. So
Yeah.
Every time the ball hits the ground, you know, you're saying to yourself, bounce, and then hit when you make contact with the ball. Does it get to that level of fundamental?
I use that religiously, particularly like returning serve, because that particular example is for timing. And different surfaces, different atmospheres, different balls, different players, it's all, you know, it's different timing. Bounce hit, or bounce hit, or bounce hit, it's all timing. So that's how you practice that. Yeah, you practice that.
All right, now let's let's shift gears here and let's talk about being a sports parent, because you've been a professional in this field, you've worked it a long time. Andre Agassi's book, he talks about playing against the monster and the way his dad was with him, and how let's just say challenging that was for him to have to deal with, in many ways overcome. Sports parents, they're sometimes a whole different breed. So how have you handled that yourself? And then how do you coach parents of gifted athletes to help them, just to help them be with their kid in a way that facilitates the kid's growth, doesn't impede?
Well, the example you used of Andre Agassi's dad, you said, well, everybody's got their own style. That's not my style. So, but it worked for them. But there were many times where Andre Agassi really did not enjoy tennis. And so if my feeling is if they're not enjoying it, then they're not going to be the best athlete that they can be. So providing the atmosphere of just enjoyment, like I mentioned earlier, just be normal. Provide all the normal things that a young kid is going to enjoy if you're working with young kids. If you're working with college age, that's a different story. They're more mature. You have to treat them a little differently. But, just when I'm actually specifically working with a young fellow, I just I try to give them all the tools, work on the skills, make sure they're having fun, and when they're competing, try to get them to own their sport, and so not to play for me, but to play for themselves. And then if they can do that, I think you're going to get their best effort.
Can we go a little bit deeper into that? I do a case study, and one of the case studies that I talk about is Billy Bob. Mm-hmm. And, Billy Bob's playing tennis, and, he sees his dad up there, and, he's constantly thinking about what his dad is thinking about him as he's playing this shot. And, in one time, there's a college player that I work with that almost quit the game because he double faulted in a critical play, critical point in time in a match, and his dad, there was a gesture, and so he was done with the sport at that point in time. He couldn't ever extricate his dad from his mind when he was playing, and so it served as a constant distraction, just like wind might be a distraction to a golfer that needs to hit the ball low and they're not sure that they've got that shot. A constant distraction of a parent that is around, that is overtly attentive, can be a distraction. So how do you coach a parent in that case, and how do you coach an athlete in that case?
Well, I can give a specific example for myself. If I'm playing with a partner, it doesn't matter who it is, and they really mess up badly. And it's something that maybe never should have happened, but it did. So what I do for them is not to ignore it, is to walk up to them and say, it never happened. And so if you can get them to let them know that, hey, it doesn't bother you, mm-hmm. It never happened. Well, what's the most important point in tennis or in sport? It's the next point. So if you can get them to move on and keep their focus on what's ahead rather than what's behind, that helps. But specifically as a parent, give them the tools, the expertise, the training, the environment. Make sure they get to their match on time. Make sure they eat properly. Make sure that all the circumstances so that help them meet their peak performance is available, and let them go out on the court. They're on their own. So when I'm observing, I'm not there. I mean, I'm in the last seat in the bleacher. I don't want them looking at me. I don't want them looking for me for advice. I can't be coaching them, but I can be taking notes. So while
what do you do with the notes?
Well, that's hopefully they'll see those notes at the, later on after the match, the good and the bad, and learn from it.
So when you're charting a match,
Yeah,
what do you chart?
I chart I chart things that they do well. Unforced errors, that's usually the big deciding factor as to whether you win or lose a match. If you look at the stats on TV of all the top players, and you look at aces and winners and all that, it's the unforced error line that determines who wins and loses. So let them see that for themselves. It's black and white. It's not me, berating them for the bad things they do. They see what their strengths and weaknesses are. And, if they really own their sport, they'll want to improve on those things. And that's how we move on and for the next match or the next practice.
How do you nurture an athlete to own their sport?
Well, it's got to be fun. If it's fun, then they're going to want to do it. They're going to want to go out there and be the very best they can. So even though it might be hard work at times, they're enjoying their success, no matter how small it might be. Every match, even success just in improving a stroke, whether they win or lose the match, that's success. And if they feel they're improving, then they're going to enjoy it. They're going to have fun. They're going to continue playing and get better.
Wow. Wonderful. Excellent. Thanks so much. So I've got a whole different sense of what proper preparation prevents poor performance in my mind.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.